have a little look at how they're going to match up. And I think there are three big things to consider here. You've got to consider the terrain. I think for the first time, we've really been able to see that with that Ndidi and also with that Rillaboom. There's speeds to consider as well. You've got, the options of that kind of Trick Room with Stack Attacker. You then have to worry about kind of the speedier Pokemon like the Calyrex Shadow Rider. You can also go for the Tailwind for Ryota. So many options for Ryota to really command the speed stats of this battlefield. And also, you've got to think about the two Calyrexes. Which one's going to come out on top, Adam?
The Calyrex mirror is probably the key to this matchup, and Ryota's team is very, very aggressive. And the way he's been playing around it, I think, could lead him to try and maybe take the edge on this one. I think his team's a little bit different. I love that Arcanine as a bit of a mix-up. So really, really interested to see. I don't know if Trick Room, if that really becomes a factor here. It could be if you're worried about something, but the Stack Attacker just seemingly staying at home for a little bit now. Maybe Ryota just going with the very aggressive control of the terrain, with the Psychic terrain, and just playing it through that way.
Yeah, and of course, Ryota does have that Mienshao, and we saw how well Arash was able to deal with that in his match against Renzo. So that's something, that Arash has got a tried and tested strategy against, but it's a different team, a different player. That Mienshao could operate very differently on Ryota's side of the field against Arash.
It's going to be another tough one for both trainers. Of course, whoever wins here goes into our losers finals and will be awaiting the loser of the winners side finals. So they're getting ever, ever closer. This is kind of the last chance in the losers bracket to make it to a losers finals and at least be within touching distance of the grand finals. So a little bit of pressure for these trainers, but they are both world champions, and I think they'll be able to handle it.
Yeah, one match at a time, but with each match, the pressure gets more and more intense. So let's jump into game one and see which of our players is going to be able to advance into the losers final. So it's going to be Arash versus Ryota, and coming out on the opposing side of the field, we have got the Mienshao and the Whimsicott for Ryota, whereas Arash has gone for his tried and tested combination of that Incineroar and the Rillaboom.
It just kind of works, doesn't it? I mean, it's so safe. Yes, you don't land the Intimidate effectively, but you still have double Fake Out, and, you're still in a pretty solid position. We've seen how Arash takes on something like the Mienshao with Fake Out into the inner focus, and then, of course, the follow-up, just Grassy Glide as well. So really kind of smart play. Of course, there are some priority options coming out from Ryota's side of the field with that Whimsicott as well. Maybe something to consider there and see how much work you can do with it. I think it's going to be a little bit different to the one he used to win the World Championships in 2017, but still a Pokemon he knows how to use and get the best out of.
I think one thing Arash has to be cautious of as well is there's the potential for an Ndidi switch in for Ryota's side of the field, meaning that Mienshao is pretty free to go for something like a close combat into that opposing Incineroar, which may look very good for Ryota, but we have seen from Arash's defensive capabilities on that Incineroar before that it can potentially survive it. But my concern if you're Arash is you can't go for that Fake Out Grassy Glide combination if there is a Psychic Terrain on the field, because the priority is just not going to be there. And Psychic Terrain has indeed joined. Psychic Surge is going to activate with that Ndidi, and I wonder how Arash is going to be able to work around this Mienshao here on the battlefield. It's going to be a switch though, and Incineroar is going to retreat for Arash as Calyrex joins the play.
I think that switching from Ryota is really, really smart, though. Blocking a potential Grassy Glide, taking away the terrain, and, of course, just saying no to priority moves as well. Really nicely done, and we'll see if Ryota fell for it. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, that is amazing. The knockoff coming out from the Mienshao, just taking Arash's Calyrex away from the battlefield before it is able to do anything whatsoever. Rillaboom going, I'm getting out of here as well, going for that U-turn. Does break the focus sash on the opposing Mienshao, but that is devastating for Arash there. Protecting from the potential close combat. Bring in your Ghost type. That sounds perfect. Not when there's a knockoff coming into that slot.
Yeah, he's read him like a book there, isn't he? As soon as he tries to avoid that close combat, he just says, I'm just going to knock you off instead and just try and knock that out. That's a bit of a disaster for Arash. It's going to be a tough one to I think, claw back from that. Every game we've seen him play so far has been so important to have this Calyrex set up for him, and to lose that on the way in, really going to be tough. I mean, he's still got 3 very good Pokemon to try and fight back with, but, this Urshifu is now staring down a Psychic type. That's going to be a bit of a problem. And yes, you are going to be able to control the terrain with the Rillaboom coming back in. But at the same time, I mean, it's just going to be an uphill struggle if this Indeedee can get in, get out and get back in. And when you've got 4 Pokemon, you have more luxury to switch than your opponent.
Yeah, you certainly do. And I think as well, being the closed team sheet format, you know, Arash may not have been aware about the knockoff coming out from the opposing Mienshao. And then we also know that there is the Choice Scarf Indeedee on the opposing side of the field. And as you mentioned, the Urshifu doesn't want to be in the battlefield facing down against the Psychic type. So Ryota maybe needs to find a way to try and break the focus sash on that opposing Urshifu. Or like you said, preserve that Indeedee and get that terrain control for later in the game.
Well, the terrain control, I think, would be really big here because it helps the expanding force out so much and, of course, increases that damage. But in the meantime, I think being able to break the focus sash, maybe soften up the Rillaboom a little bit, could be really, really helpful for Ryota, and that's something he's going to have to think about over the next couple turns.
Yeah, really nice play here, you know, bringing that Pokemon into the back and bringing the Whimsicott onto the field. Again, Whimsicott can apply some pressure to that Urshifu, but Urshifu just going for a protect on this particular turn. Knockoff coming out once again from the Mienshao. Going to remove the Assault Vest from Arash's Rillaboom that decides to leave the battlefield once again, going down into that opposing Whimsicott, giving it a little chip of damage. And I think Arash, you know, doing what we've seen him do time and time again here, bringing in the Pokemon like the Rillaboom, like the Incineroar, and having them just stay on the field momentarily before coming out and giving him that switch ability to be able to apply pressure, whether it is by controlling the terrain, you want to make sure that you can switch your Rillaboom in, or by having the fake out utility as well.
Getting that Rillaboom's Assault Vest off, though, really, really important. Assuming that Ryota's fourth Pokemon is his Shadow Rider Calyrex, that makes it a lot more manageable. We saw in Arash's game earlier today how well it was able to take those Astral Barrages when there was the concern of the Assault Vest. But now that's gone, now that's been knocked off, that does make things a whole lot more manageable for something like this potential Shadow Rider Calyrex to deal with it. So Ryota, yes, he's had to slow down a little bit. It's not as crazy a turn as catching the Shadow Rider Calyrex on the way in, but still setting things up for a little bit later. I mean, now that Assault Vest is gone, the threat of a Shadow Rider Calyrex and, of course, Indeedee could just start cleaning up later on. So doing the right things, I think going through the motions a little bit here just to get the ball position where he needs to.
Yeah, and of course, Whimsicott being able to potentially go for something like a Tailwind, making sure the speed is nice and advantageous for Ryota if that Shadow Calyrex wants to come in later, just to make sure that it has the speed advantage and just pick up some really good KOs here. I like this play by Arash, preserving the Incineroar for the Calyrex later on, as the Whimsicott is able to go for that Moonblast, take the Urshifu right down to its focus sash, leaving it very, very vulnerable to an attack later on. You know, especially attack drop, not going to worry about that at all. Mienshao going to go for the close combat, and it's not enough to pick up a KO against the opposing Rillaboom. Does still do a huge chunk of damage against it, and this is where Ryota really is having that offensive pressure, picking up some really, really good damage. Urshifu, however, is going to show off its offensive pressure as well, with those surging strikes, can deal some good damage into that opposing Mienshao and remove it from the field. But this is where things get dangerous. You've given Ryota the opportunity to bring in a Pokemon from the back, and if it is something like the Indeedee, then you can go for that expanding force, you know, get that terrain control, and that will deal big damage to both the Rillaboom and the Urshifu at this point. When I say big damage, there's not a lot of damage needed to be dealt, let's be honest.
No, they're both very, very low, and that limits your options for potential switching. You know, if Arash wants to switch out the Rillaboom to maybe try and preserve the terrain, could be a problem. I do actually really like this from Ryota, just throwing out his Calyrex, trying to make sure that that terrain is locked in before he brings back in the Choice Scarf Indeedee to sweep and clean up a little bit here. So really nicely done. Of course, the Incineroar is still a bit of a concern, but I think there's going to be options to try and deal with it.
Yeah, and to be fair, actually mentioning that Incineroar, it's good that it's not the Indeedee, because those expanding forces aren't going to affect the Incineroar at all. So at least with the Astral Barrage, you can pick up KOs against Rillaboom and Urshifu if they decide to stay in, or at least if the Incineroar joins the field, you're going to be able to deal some damage, as opposed to none with an expanding force.
No, you're not going to get anything done by using the expanding force just over and over into Incineroar. So you kind of want to see where the board position is before you even get to that point. And I like that from Ryota, playing it smart, playing it safe. Of course, you do have to worry about the Grassy Glide now. So maybe it's time to, you know, try and sneak in the Indeedee, but you don't want to throw it in and let it get knocked out super easily. So just smart, safe play. No knockouts for a few turns here, but, you know, I think Ryota may just be able to try and sneak one in relatively soon. Arash is desperate to keep control of this terrain, and Ryota's not even shown his terrain yet.
No, exactly. Terrain's hiding in the back for Ryota here, but this is the Pokemon that Arash has that is going to cause the most problems. You know, the Incineroar can apply great pressure to both the Whimsicott and the Calyrex. Calyrex going for the Astral Barrage. The Urshifu is going to hang on for one more turn thanks to the Detect, but this Ghost type move is going to connect down into the Incineroar. Still do a decent chunk of damage, probably just under a third there. And depending on what the Whimsicott has gone for here, goes for the Moonblast, following up into that particular move slot as well. The double up Incineroar is going to be able to take it, but certainly putting himself in a really vulnerable position going forward. And I think this is the thing, Ryota's not necessarily picking up KOs, but he's putting the Pokemon in such good range for the knockouts in the following turns.
I really don't see a way around just losing both your Pokemon next turn. I mean, Ryota's got the speed advantage. Urshifu's not going to be able to take any single attack. So, you know, it's just going to be a double knockout for Ryota in this following turn if he wants to. And I don't even think Arash is going to give that to him. Looking at the menu options here, just saying, you know what, you've weakened all my stuff. I'm going to lose something this turn, and then I'm going to lose the Terrain War as well. So Rash never really getting a foothold in the game after that early knockout onto the Shadow Rider Calyrex on the way in.
Yeah, that was phenomenal, and what a way to really put Arash on the back foot, losing such a powerhouse like the Calyrex, and particularly when Ryota was able to have his Calyrex nice and safe in the back to come back in, and you could just see how dominant it was there in that particular state of play. The Incineroar could only really come in and fake out the Whimsicott, for example, but the Astral Barrage is still going to go off, deal some more damage, and then without the fake out the next turn, Astral Barrage can clean up again. So really strong play and a good showing of how important Calyrex is in this matchup as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, in this format, you've got one restricted Pokemon, and that Pokemon has got to be impactful. You know, we saw it yesterday in some of the matches where people would lose their restricted early and just never quite get back in the game. Even though the Calyrex Shadow Rider on Ryota's side of the field wasn't getting knockouts crazy, it wasn't getting huge Grim boosts or anything to just keep going. The fact it had the spread move in Astral Barrage was applying pressure to both sides of the field, really forcing Arash's hand a little bit in how he played, and I just think with that forced for him, he was never able to get a good foothold in the game.
Yeah, and the Whimsicott as well was really interesting. It was dealing big damage with that Moonblast, but as well it can actually apply so much pressure to Pokemon like the Urshifu, because there's not really a lot that Urshifu can do in terms of its move typing to a Whimsicott, and the same with the Rillaboom, you know. Whimsicott's not going to mind taking a Grassy Glide or two necessarily, and it can still chip away, particularly when we know that the Assault Vest had gone off that Rillaboom. It didn't have that extra protective measure.
That knockoff on Mienshao, really important actually, just not only for taking out the Calyrex, but as you say, just keeping that Rillaboom in check, and that was something that Arash relied on in his earlier game against Shadow Rider Calyrex. You know, in his earlier game, he relied on Assault Vest Rillaboom and, of course, the substitute on his Calyrex. He didn't get to do either of those games, and that's the outcome that you get because of it.
Yeah, well, let's jump into game 2 and see exactly how the adjustments are going to be made here, whether Arash is going to be able to protect his Calyrex going into it. The leads coming out here for Ryota. We have got the Whimsicott and the Mienshao jumping out into the fray, whereas tried and tested once again from Arash, it is the Incineroar and the Rillaboom.
Do we think Arash is going to switch out the Incineroar again? Do we think he's going to go for that? That is the question I want to find out the answer to, because once again, if that's called, that's a problem, I think, and being able to just take out that Calyrex on the way in so important. Arash, I think, is the one kind of being asked to change up his play, maybe bring it in a different slot. It's coming in, and this is all on Ryota now to see exactly what it does. I mean, there's no way to slow down the Calyrex, the Mienshao with a fake out. You can do damage, but you can't do that. So if this switch happens again, oh, I'm a little nervous for Arash here.
Oh, a little bit of deja vu. We can see the Incineroar leaving the field. Calyrex has come in, but has Ryota gone for the same strategy, going for that knockoff? Or has he maybe changed it up, going for the close combat? But no, instead, a fake out into that opposing Rillaboom. It's not going to be able to break the focus sash of the Mienshao with a U-turn. And Whimsicott very safely able to get the speed control up on Ryota's side of the field with that tailwind. That can be critical, particularly as Arash's Calyrex has survived. It's here on the battlefield. All Ryota really does need now is to get terrain control to stop those Grassy Glide priorities, and he's in a very speedy, dominant position.
I mean, he can also take a Grassy Glide onto the Mienshao really quite comfortably, you know, because he has the Focus Sash. Of course, you have to be a little bit conscious of it. Maybe if the Calyrex protects, you get caught with something like the Grassy Glide. Then the next turn, you just get Grassy Glided before you're given that opportunity to land that knockoff. So Ryota, not as free a knockoff as you might think. Definitely has to find the right time for it. But, of course, what does he have in the back? Is it going to be the male Indeedee, which can just take away Grassy Glide absolutely immediately? And I think Arash, with this move selection here, being very, very respectful of that, just trying to break the Focus Sash and keep a bit of better terrain control, but no switches yet.
No, you can really see the seconds ticking away there. Just protects the Calyrex. Rillaboom is going to have to take the Moonblast, and the Mienshao following up with the close combat, but Rillaboom able to survive. We've seen the way Arash is able to expertly train his Pokemon defensively and certainly has applied the same skill to that Rillaboom. Like you mentioned there, Adam, I think going for that U-turn to break the focus sash on Mienshao is critical because it leaves it now exposed to a KO. But what an amazing survive by that Rillaboom. And it again gives Arash the opportunity to now switch in a Pokemon from the back and try and apply some pressure. But you have to watch out for that speed control that Ryota has got. You know, the Whimsicott's still hanging around, and it's all very well and good if Arash wants to burn through some Tailwind turns, but you have to get rid of the Whimsicott to stop Tailwind coming up again later in the match.
There's the impact, though, of the Assault Vest and why it's so important to the Rillaboom. The Moonblast not able to put down enough to bring it into range for the close combat, and that's why it's such a popular item on the Rillaboom. Of course, getting out, getting your terrain, potential control in the back, really, really important for Arash, who needs these grassy glides to potentially wrap up and level up the game. But we got to give credit to Ryota for that turn. Even though he didn't get a knockout, he correctly called that Calyrex Protect. Might have been a little bit obvious to some, but still, heads-up play around it, just targeting down that Rillaboom, making it super easy to get knocked out later in the game.
Honestly, I'm really impressed by the offensive synergy of both Whimsicott and Mienshao, a sentence I didn't think I was going to utter. But when you look at the pressure here, the knockoff can really target down that Calyrex, Moonblast can really target down the Urshifu, and it certainly does put Ryota in a very offensive position here. At the same time, you might want to predict that Calyrex is going to switch out for something like the Incineroar, that, you know, isn't going to mind necessarily taking that knockoff and could go for that close combat, but it's such a risk if Arash, you know, obviously keeps the Calyrex in play. He does go for the switch, brings in the Incineroar. The Intimidate not going to be to any avail here, but it does still at least give you the pressure to maybe go for a 5-time move into that opposing Whimsicott and remove it, or have the fake out utility, as long as we do not see that Male and DD make a switch in. Urshifu, I think, quite wisely protecting here in the face of this Whimsicott that does go for the Moonblast, but it was targeting down what was that Calyrex. Now the Incineroar does a decent chunk of damage against it, followed up by the knockoff here. So wise to switch out the Calyrex, but Incineroar certainly looking in a little bit of a predicament here with its HP dwindled and no berry anymore.
No Citrus Berry available, and that means that it's going to be way easier to knock out over the course of the game. And it's another turn, actually, where we've got to give mad credit to Ryota for just being able to call the protect, call which slot he's actually going to be able to get damage down on, and it's kind of a little reminiscent of game one, that while he might not be getting knockouts, you know, everything Arash is trying just isn't working out particularly safely for him. You know, some of these switch-ins are going to be very, very difficult to run effectively, and just really getting caught. And the only damage Ryota's taken this whole game is that U-turn into the Urshifu. Yes, it breaks the focus sash, but not taking much damage at all throughout this set.
I mean, it's really difficult for Arash here because you need to stop the Whimsicott from potentially getting up a second tail when we've seen how having that speed advantage has been difficult. But you have to play around this Mienshao. It cannot be underestimated. Slight, you know, sigh of relief, it's left the field, but then Indeedee is now here on the battlefield, bringing that Psychic Surge into effect, going to stop any potential, you know, priority from Aquajet or Fake Out coming out from Arash's side of the field here. Incineroar, however, also going to leave the battlefield in replace for that Calyrex going to be rejoining. I wonder what the Whimsicott's going to do, however.
Yeah, the Whimsicott's going to be left to be the offensive threat from Ryota's side, and it's going up against the potential Urshifu as well. But if there's a Pokemon that can deal some good damage, I think Whimsicott's put in a good shift, mainly because it's just got the type advantage, bringing Urshifu back down to its focus sash.
Yeah, exactly. Urshifu being very vulnerable here, and it goes for the Surging Strikes. I think this is going to be going down into that opposing Indeedee. Looks like it should be enough to be able to pick up the KO against it, nice and easy. But the one problem this does, although it's great that you've got rid of this Pokemon, it does now give sort of Ryota the opportunity to bring in the Calyrex from behind and Tailwind once again. We saw that it just petered out. Whimsicott is still there, very happy on the battlefield, and then that could have put Arash at a disadvantage because his Calyrex is going to have to take an Asteroid Barrage before Ryota's.
Yeah, and the big thing here as well is you may lose the terrain war, but you're just going to be in complete control of the speed. So should be feeling pretty good about that position. Like you said, the Calyrex is always going to get outsped by the opposing Calyrex if the Tailwind goes up. So the Whimsicott just completely free to do that. And there's no clear and obvious answer to how to try and even stop that. You can't stop the Whimsicott setting that up this turn, and maybe Arash just has to try and play a little bit defensive and maybe even stretch the game to try and get through the next 3 turns.
Well, that's the thing. Ryota really only does have to kind of click in the buttons of offensive pressure here to kind of take through this match. I mean, the Urshifu is going to fall down to an Astral Barrage. Calyrex is going to be in a bit of a predicament once that speed control goes up. If, however, Arash is potentially able to utilize, the fake out Pokemon that he's got in the back, he's got two of them still there. The Rillaboom, it's on low HP, but it is still viable in this match. That could potentially allow Arash the opportunity to get that substitute up, and that's where the game could really turn. Being able to take an Astral Barrage and deal one back and pick up the KOs could indeed sort of turn this around for Arash.
But the problem with Arash's board, even though he's got the Pokemon advantages, two of them are going to get felled by a light breeze. They're so low. And I think the offensive pressure of Astral Barrage can be considered more than a light breeze from a Shadow Rider Calyrex. So, this is exactly what we were expecting out of Ryota, and I don't know if it's just going to be enough. Because as soon as this Astral Barrage lands on Incineroar, it's nice and easy for the Moonblast to pick up that Incineroar at any time. And if the Incineroar is spending time stopping that Whimsicott, you'd have to A, switch in the Rillaboom, which is just going to get completely felled, and B, then your Incineroar's just potentially going to get caught with the Astral Barrage or Moonblasted as well. So really tough situation with, in this mirror, the Calyrex on Arash's side just losing out because of that Tailwind.
Yeah, no, very true. And of course, Incineroar coming in during the Psychic Terrain, it's not even going to have any fake out pressure going down onto that opposing Whimsicott. It makes things very, very difficult. You can see the low HP stats of Arash's Pokemon. They are all still here with us. They haven't been KO'd in this match as of yet, but certainly they're leaving themselves very vulnerable and kind of sacrificing themselves to allow Arash to switch Pokemon in later in the game. Calyrex retreats, and we see the Urshifu join the field, and Whimsicott here going for a little helping hand, applauding the majesty of this Calyrex that's able to go for the Astral Barrage, and I believe it's going to get two very solid quick KOs here, Adam.
Yeah, not much you can do about that one, as the helping hand just makes sure there's no guessing on the numbers, and an easy double knockout for the Calyrex. Of course, that's Grimnay coming through, meaning not only is this Calyrex over on Ryota's side faster thanks to the Tailwind, it does more damage as well thanks to those Grimnay boosts. This Rillaboom coming back in, is probably going to be forced to try and knock it out with a Grassy Glide. That's its only option, but if Ryota can work around that, maybe just a turn protecting, this Rillaboom can get knocked out. It doesn't have Protect because it has the Assault Vest, so Rillaboom only going to be afforded potentially one Grassy Glide. If it Grassy Glides the Calyrex and Ryota protects it to avoid that, yes, Arash could set up the substitute, but then I don't think it matters in the following turn where you just get Moonblast and Astral Barrage again. So this speed control, those Tailwinds have just been huge for Ryota.
Yeah, it certainly has been. And of course, having that substitute is brilliant in order to preserve that Calyrex, but like you mentioned, the Rillaboom just doesn't have the sustainability at the moment to be able to survive these attacks and allow the Calyrex to really be able to set that up. You can, of course, Grassy Glide, try and pick up the KO, and like you said, then have the utility to get that substitute up, but it just looks to be too much of an uphill climb for Arash at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one to ask, you've got to buy enough time to take those hits, get through the Tailwind as well, and just not get hit. Because if you get hit, you're getting knocked out. There's no way, no question about it. Ryota not even protecting, just knows his numbers on the Grassy Glide.
Yeah, knows it's going to be able to survive that. Goes for the Astral Barrage, connecting down into Rillaboom and Calyrex. Picks up the solid KOs, particularly with that Grimnay boost, helping out just a little bit. Fantastic play there from Ryota, being able to pick up the damage here against Arash. I mean, what a combination with that Whimsicott in play. And Ryota is going